Hello, class. I hope you all are having a fantastic day. Today, we are going to be talking about the genre of modern fantasy and what it is about, what it entails, some different books that we can look at, and we're going to compare it to another genre. So, let's jump in. What is modern fantasy? Well, you may be thinking that. What modern fantasy is it goes beyond what we know to be the physical world. It is distinguished from other genres by story elements that go against the natural world that we live in or that we know. So events of like magic, like the Harry Potter series, are a very good example of that. Modern fantasy also enables us as readers to imagine a completely different world than what we live in. Examples that kind of make up stories of these modern fantasy stories are like talking animals or imaginary worlds that allow us to imagine different worlds and walk through those. Also, fanciful characters like hobbits, dwarves, or giants. There's also magical beings like witches, sorcerers, genies, and stuff of that sort. The list goes on, but all of them together make up a modern fantasy story or genre. It's just basically a modern fantasy just goes against what we know to be the world that we live in. It's completely different and it seems made up. Alrighty, so we have some different modern fantasy motifs. A motif, if you're wondering, is basically a design or pattern on how to write your modern fantasy or a pattern or design that the author follows. And so we have magic, different worlds, good versus evil, heroism, special characters, fantastic objects, and things of that sort. So the magic portion of writing a book is kind of intertwined into almost every modern fantasy book in one way or another. For example, in different or special worlds, um, we are able to see places or geographies that magic is able to be used freely and that magic takes place. And good versus evil, for example, Harry Potter is a lot of magic in there, and it's Harry Potter, which is the good, and his friends are good, fighting against the evils of the world that are trying to destroy magic or trying to use magic for bad purposes. In heroism, there's usually it follows us, takes us on a quest or a journey of a certain hero, and we're able to see how he grows and what he does, and we're able to also get a look into his emotions. That see, he kind of is human, so we're able to relate to him in that way. Um, there are special characters that is also magic because there's giants, wizards, fairies, dwarves, things of that sort that we don't see in our natural world, in the world that we live in, but they're present in these modern fantasy stories. And then there's also fantastic objects, and these objects are objects such as talking mirrors that tell us the future, or magical hats that talk to us, or what else? Magic beans that make beanstalks grow super tall and stuff like that. So that's those kind of are ways all to write a modern fantasy story, and things to look for when you're reading is there magic, is it in a different world, is it good versus evil, what is it that makes it a modern fantasy book. When we look at genres, we also want to think about a genre or a different genre that we are able to compare and contrast with. So when looking at modern fantasy, we're going to also look at science fiction and kind of compare and contrast the two. So, science fiction is based upon scientific possibilities and scientific fact. So, in modern fantasy, it just can't be explained in the natural world that we live in. Where in a science fiction story, we're able to like use science and stuff that we know to be able to explain what happened. Or in modern fantasy, like I said, there's magic, and magic in science fiction is often based off scientific fact. So we're able to see magic being used in science fiction. It's just that in a science fiction with magic, we're usually able to use scientific fact, like, oh, well, that apple fell because of gravity, not it wasn't picked up by the mind and then thrown across the room. However, there is some truth in modern fantasy. Even though we can't prove it with scientific fact, there is a little bit of truth behind it. It's able to show human emotion, dreams, hopes, fears, etc. So when we think about this and where it may show it, we are able to think about heroism, and through the story of a hero, we're able to see what he thinks usually, and we're able to see what he fears, his biggest fears, or what he dreams to be, whether that is his dream is to reach the Hall of Valhalla as a Greek god, or is he afraid that he's going to be struck down by Odin, that's what we think about. So there's some truth in that. We're able to see that even though he is a superhero or some type of hero, he still has human qualities. And in a modern fantasy, if the stories or if the author isn't able to do it so that it can show human emotion and provide some truth that we can relate to as readers, it often doesn't end up being a very successful book. However, both modern fantasy and science fiction are able to cast light on the realities of life in their own unique way. All right, guys. So we've been talking about modern fantasy, and if you are interested, I have some books that you may be interested in reading. If not, that's completely okay, but I just thought that I would give you a list of some. The first one that I have listed is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Um, this is a science fiction but also modern fantasy book based in future North America, where rulers of the city maintain control through a televised survival competition, putting young people from each of the 12 districts that they live in against one another. The protagonist is 16-year-old Katniss, and her skills are put to the test when she voluntarily takes her younger sister's place to fight. Like I said, this is science fiction but also modern fantasy, and it's modern fantasy because we are able to see that in this government or in this nation that um, they put people against each other in a fight to the death, and that's different from our natural world because there's no place that I know of that does that today. And if you can think of a place, please let me know. The second one that I have listed is Harry Potter, the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. This book is modern fantasy because, as you may know, it is mainly based around a lot of magic. In fact, it is just a magic book. And it follows the protagonist Harry through his life of trying to figure out who he is and what his goal is in life as a wizard. The third book that I have listed is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. This follows the story of Wilbur the pig as he discovers that he is destined to be the farmer's Christmas dinner. And he's not very happy with that until his spider friend Charlotte decides to help him find out who he is and what he can do to make sure, he's not gonna be Christmas dinner. And this is a modern fantasy book because we are able to see talking animals, basically. Or not basically, we're able to see talking animals. And these animals talk with each other, but also talk to us almost. And so we're able to jump in as a reader and understand. So this is categorized in the animal fantasy portion of modern fantasy. The next book that I have listed is called The Imaginary by A.F. Harold. Amanda Shuffleup's best friend is an imaginary one named Roger. Mr. Bunting hunts imaginary people, and so he is soon in pursuit of this imaginary friend named Roger. This is a chapter book featuring the illustrations of award-winning artist Emily Gravett, and it's modern fantasy because it's based off a supernatural tale almost. And so what I mean by that is that although we have imaginary friends, we don't really have people who go out and try to hunt our imaginary friends. Instead, people let us have our imaginary friends and live our lives as we are. Where in this one, she has an imaginary friend named Roger, but there is a man named Mr. Bunting who is trying to hunt him down and get rid of him. The next book I have there is The Hero of Little Street by Gregory Rogers. It is a wordless picture book in which a boy and a dog go into and out of paintings in London's National Gallery of Painting. And by doing so, they're fleeing the present-day troubles, but only to wind up in some sort of troubles in the different locations that they jump through in different time periods. So it shows them jumping into different paintings and winding up where those paintings are set in place. So it's almost like they're time traveling and jumping through time. And by doing that, it's considered modern fantasy because in today's world, we're not able to really time travel quite yet. In the future, who knows? We might be able to be. And if one of you decide to invent a time traveling machine, that would be amazing. That would be so cool. The next book that I have listed there is The Wolf Who Cried Boy by Bob Hartman and illustrated by Tim Raglan, and it is kind of a twist off The Boy Who Cried Wolf, the original story, where um, there is a boy who jokingly cries that there's a wolf when he's guarding his sheep, and people come out to make sure there's not a wolf and to help him. And eventually there actually is a wolf, and he cries wolf, but nobody comes out to help him. So this is kind of a twist on this. Um, and the last book that I have is Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus by Mo Williams. And it's also illustrated by Mo Williams. And this book is about it puts you in as a reader where the characters are talking to you. So the bus driver tells us, don't let whatever you do, I'm going to leave, take care of my bus, but whatever you do not let the pigeon drive the bus. Well, eventually in this picture book, the pigeon comes up and starts talking to us, and we have to keep telling him no and no and no. And so in doing so, this kind of puts us in the position of, well, what do our parents hear, or what do our parents feel like when they always have to keep saying no, even though we keep trying, you know? And so that's why it's kind of modern fantasy, is because the animal, the pigeon, is able to talk to us. And same with the boy who cried, or the wolf who cried boy. It's kind of a swap on the stories where the wolves are the main characters instead of the humans. So the wolves are talking. So it's also an animal fantasy book. So one of the chapter books that I strongly recommend is the Harry Potter series. This is, like I said, it's a modern fantasy chapter book, and in one of the excerpts that I would like to share with you, it talks about I'm just going to discuss it with you. It talks about a giant who breaks into Hogwarts, or the main place where they're at, and Harry and his friends have to kind of use their magic, but also sneak around. So this is modern fantasy because there's a fantastic object in their wands and hats and stuff, and talking hats, but also in special characters like the giant. This book takes place in a much different world from ours. It's good versus evil and allows readers to jump into an imaginary world full of wonder and surprises. So I strongly recommend this book if you are interested in chapter books and especially in magic. So the next book that I have here is Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. This is a modern fantasy picture book, like I said, that takes us through the story of a pigeon talking to us. And so I have a couple pictures that I'm going to show you and we're going to talk about here. So we'll go to those next. So here we're able to see the bus driver telling us, I have to leave for a bit, whatever you do, don't let the pigeon drive the bus. And as we continue reading, eventually the pigeon that we see here comes and he says, I'll be your best friend. And we say, oh, okay. So he's trying to be nice to us, and we're talking to him, having a conversation. And then he's trying to get on the bus, but we have to keep telling him no. And so we see that as the story progresses, how he reacts. And so it kind of puts us and helps us to see, well, what do we look like when our parents keep saying no? Do we look silly like this pigeon? I don't know. Alrighty, so if you are interested in any of this, I encourage you all to find a fantasy book, a modern fantasy book of your own, jump into it and start reading it. And if you would like to do that, I would love to sit down with you and discuss possible book choices, and as you read, talk about what's going on to make sure you understand it and see how you understand it. I would love to do that. So if you are interested, just come talk to me after class someday or shoot me an email and we can talk about it.